You know what's wild? The second you stop emotionally drowning, they start swimming in your direction. The exact moment you release your grip on their attention, stop treating their texts like oxygen, and quit revolving your entire day around whether they notice you, everything flips. The power shifts. And here's what messes with your head. You didn't become heartless. You just became whole. There's a massive difference between the two. When you're overinvested, you broadcast desperation like a radio signal everyone can pick up. When you're self-contained, you generate magnetism. Real magnetism. The kind that pulls without trying. And magnetism attracts. It doesn't beg. It doesn't chase. It doesn't perform. Most guys believe that intensity equals depth. They think pouring out every feeling, constantly checking in, and worshiping someone proves their value. They believe emotional overflow demonstrates strength. But emotional overwhelm doesn't build attraction. It builds obligation. It creates pressure where there should be pleasure. When you unload everything too fast, you eliminate the breathing room desire needs to grow. You accidentally delete mystery from the equation. You erase uncertainty. And when uncertainty vanishes, so does fascination. Without fascination, you're just another predictable option in their notifications. Here's what stings to admit. Early obsession is usually fantasy disguised as connection. You're not responding to who they actually are. You're responding to the highlight reel playing in your mind. The potential. The edited version your imagination created during a single good conversation. And when you emotionally commit to that fantasy too soon, your energy becomes suffocating. Heavy with unspoken expectations. They feel that weight pressing down even when they can't name it. But when you regulate your internal world, when you enjoy their company without losing yourself in it, everything transforms. You stop having meltdowns over delayed responses. Their mood swings don't throw you off balance. Radio silence doesn't trigger panic attacks in your chest. And that unshakable composure creates an unexpected tension in the dynamic. Because now instead of you desperately seeking validation, they start questioning where they stand with you. The script flips entirely. Attraction flourishes in spaciousness, not suffocation. When you withdraw emotionally, not out of spite or game playing but from genuine self-discipline, you create breathing room for their imagination to run wild. And imagination is dangerously powerful in attraction. When someone doesn't feel you constantly hovering, endlessly validating, relentlessly seeking confirmation, they naturally lean closer. They start filling the gaps themselves. Their mind does the work you used to exhaust yourself doing. There's something undeniably compelling about a man who participates without being possessed, who appreciates moments without trying to freeze them in place, who connects without constricting. That equilibrium generates emotional contrast, real contrast, and contrast is what ignites actual chemistry between two people. When you're permanently available, constantly expressive, perpetually invested, there's zero room left for them to pursue you. You've already given them everything before they even asked. When you master feeling less, you stop reacting and start responding. There's a universe of difference between those two actions. You select your words instead of vomiting emotions all over the conversation. You identify patterns instead of begging for reassurance after every shift in their energy. And that composure communicates something profound to their subconscious. Self-reliance. Genuine self-reliance. You're not asking them to fix you. Not asking them to stabilize your mood. Not asking them to complete the broken pieces of your identity. You're already complete. Already whole. Already good. And completeness is intoxicating because it's genuinely rare in today's world. In an era where people form attachments in hours and abandon them in days, where emotional impulsivity is practically celebrated, self-control becomes exceptional. It stands out like a lighthouse in fog. When you resist the urge to rush labels, confess prematurely, or merge your entire existence into theirs, you build substance instead of neediness. You construct something real instead of something desperate. This isn't about emotional suppression. Let's be clear on that. It's about emotional pacing, strategic timing. You let connection develop proportionally to shared reality, not imagined potential. Not the fantasy you built after 3 dates. Not the future you designed in your head during a good conversation. You don't hand out loyalty before consistency appears in their actions. You don't grant priority before effort becomes mutual and visible. And when your investment grows gradually, brick by brick, it carries genuine weight. Because it's earned through their behavior, not donated out of your fear. The paradox is beautifully simple once you see it. The moment you quit trying to lock them down emotionally, they begin trying to lock you down. When you detach from outcomes, your behavior becomes clearer, steadier, more intentional, less clouded by anxiety. And that crystalline steadiness makes them feel the void you used to fill with constant attention. They sense the uncertainty you used to eliminate with overcommunication. They feel compelled to close the distance you've created simply by standing still. Because the less you emotionally pursue, the more empty space they need to fill. Human nature abhors a vacuum. When you stop filling every silence, every gap, every moment of potential doubt, they rush in to fill it themselves. The transformation doesn't happen instantly. It's not some magic switch you flip tonight and wake up different tomorrow. And it doesn't come from turning cold or playing the distant, aloof character. It emerges when you stop outsourcing your emotional foundation to someone else's behavior. When you wake up and your entire mood isn't dictated by whether they sent a good morning text. When your concentration doesn't shatter because of a slight tonal shift in their message. When your self-worth doesn't fluctuate wildly with their attention levels. That internal fortress transforms your entire energy signature. People feel it without you saying a single word about it. You quit bargaining for reassurance like you're negotiating a hostage situation. You stop hunting for hidden meanings in every word they type. And that absence of emotional starvation makes you simultaneously harder to decode and impossible to replace. Most men don't grasp how obvious emotional overinvestment appears to the other person. It's written all over your behavior like neon signs. It shows in lightning fast response times, in constant initiation, in how you silently rearrange your entire calendar to stay accessible whenever they might want you. It shows in how you over-explain trivial misunderstandings just to dodge potential conflict. How you apologize for things that don't require apologies. How you seek permission for decisions that are entirely yours to make. None of these behaviors are malicious. You're not intentionally sabotaging yourself. But collectively they broadcast something unmistakable to anyone paying attention. You're more terrified of losing them than they are of losing you. An imbalance always destroys attraction. Always. When you genuinely master feeling less, and I mean you stop convulsing at every emotional ripple, you reclaim internal leverage. Not manipulative power games. Not toxic withholding. But authentic internal authority over your own life. The capacity to leave disrespect without creating drama. The ability to exist comfortably in silence without filling it with nervous chatter. The freedom to let them miss you instead of constantly reminding them you exist through notifications and check-ins. And that silence accomplishes more than any confession ever could. More than any paragraph text. More than any grand gesture trying to prove your worth. There's tremendous power in emotional unpredictability rooted in strength. Not chaotic hot and cold torture. Not psychological warfare designed to mess with their head. But the simple reality that you don't broadcast every thought, impulse, and intention the second it enters your mind. When someone cannot completely map your emotional landscape, they invest exponentially more energy attempting to decode you. Trying to figure you out becomes a puzzle their brain wants to solve. Curiosity transforms into attachment. And that attachment intensifies when they have to work for access to your inner world. When you're excessively expressive too early, you eliminate intrigue from the equation. You reveal your entire strategy before the game even begins. You show all your cards face up on the table. But when you withhold strategically, when you let dimensions unfold naturally over weeks instead of days, the dynamic becomes exploratory. An adventure instead of a download. They hunger to discover more. They want to access deeper layers. And with each layer they unlock through time and consistency, their emotional investment compounds. You need to grasp something critical that changes everything. Emotional intensity feels powerful momentarily, in the heat of the moment, but restraint feels powerful permanently. Over months and years. Intensity burns fast and bright like gasoline on fire. Restraint builds slow and deep like oak roots growing underground. When you pace yourself, when you don't escalate vulnerability prematurely, when you don't construct future fantasies after one exceptional week, you're protecting the long-term potential from short-term delusion. You're refusing to build castles on foundations that haven't been tested yet. You're not handing over your heart to someone who's only shown up for a few good conversations. The more detached you become from specific outcomes, the more authentic you appear. You're not performing some character you think they want to see. You're not calculating every word for maximum effect. You're not attempting to impress anyone with rehearsed stories and manufactured moments. You're simply existing in your own lane, moving at your own speed, living your actual life instead of staging a performance of what you think relationship material looks like. And that authenticity, that quiet self-assurance radiating from someone comfortable in their own skin, makes them lean in emotionally, because they sense you're not desperately trying to trap them. You're consciously choosing to be present, not frantically clinging to stay relevant in their world. People invest deeper when stakes exist, when they're uncertain about their standing, when they recognize they could potentially lose something valuable if they don't step up their effort. If you constantly promise you'll always be available regardless of how they behave, you eliminate stakes entirely. You remove consequences from the equation. There's no incentive for them to invest more, respect your time, or value your presence. But when your presence feels earned through their consistent effort, when your attention feels selective rather than automatic, when your commitment appears conditional on mutual respect, emotional investment skyrockets on their end. This is where most men self-sabotage catastrophically without even realizing it. They confuse emotional honesty with emotional surrender. Two completely different concepts. Honesty is authentic communication, sharing your thoughts and feelings when appropriate. Surrender is granting someone complete emotional access before they've demonstrated they can protect it responsibly. Before they've proven they won't weaponize your vulnerability during the first disagreement. When you surrender prematurely, you create dependency instead of desire. When you maintain measured boundaries, you create genuine attraction that builds over time. And here's the quiet truth that rewrites everything. When you stop making someone the axis of your emotional universe, they often start making you the center of theirs. The dynamic inverts completely. When you're not chasing reassurance every day, not pushing for labels every week, not demanding certainty about where this is going, they begin experiencing the uncertainty themselves. They start sensing the possibility of loss, the fear that maybe you're not as locked in as they assumed. And that sensation, that subtle tension living in the background, is what makes emotions deepen authentically. Not because you're manipulating outcomes with calculated moves, but because you finally stopped hemorrhaging your heart prematurely to someone still proving themselves. When you truly detach from needing specific results, your entire presence transforms in ways that cannot be manufactured or faked. You move more deliberately through life. You speak with greater clarity instead of word vomit. You quit trying to impress and simply express what's actually on your mind without filter or performance. And that shift generates emotional friction in the best possible way. Because now instead of you questioning your position constantly, they start questioning theirs with you. The tables turn without you forcing anything. That reversal alone restructures the dynamic more powerfully than any clever tactic ever could. Any scripted line you memorized. Any dating strategy you studied online. Most people expect to be pursued emotionally from day one. They anticipate constant engagement filling their phone. Endless reassurance validating their attractiveness. Perpetual enthusiasm confirming your interest hasn't faded since yesterday. So when you don't overextend yourself, when you respond warmly but not desperately, it disrupts their familiar rhythm completely. The pattern they're used to dancing doesn't match your steps. They begin leaning forward to reestablish certainty, to confirm you're still interested, to make sure they haven't lost your attention. And that forward lean is where emotional investment actually begins on their side. There's a psychological principle operating here that's been proven repeatedly. People treasure what requires effort. What comes easy gets taken for granted. If your time, attention, and affection are immediately and infinitely available without them lifting a finger, zero effort is needed to maintain access to you. You're just always there. Like furniture. But when your presence feels intentional rather than automatic, When access feels earned through their actions rather than assumed as a given, emotional value naturally escalates in their mind. When you feel less in the reactive sense, managing impulses instead of being managed by them, you become nearly unshakable to outside chaos. You don't spiral over minor inconsistencies in their texting patterns. You don't dissect tone obsessively like you're analyzing ancient hieroglyphics. You don't beg for clarity the moment silence emerges for 6 hours. And that emotional composure delivers a quiet message their subconscious receives loud and clear. You are not easily destabilized by external circumstances. You have internal anchors. And people gravitate towards stability naturally. Especially in a world where emotions whiplash wildly between extremes and attention evaporates instantly for the next notification. When you remain grounded regardless of what's happening around you, you become the stillness in chaos. The fixed reference point everyone seeks when their own world feels unstable. And when someone recognizes you are not emotionally pursuing them with hungry eyes, they often begin pursuing your stability, chasing the calm you represent. It's not about pretending indifference like some cold, robotic person. It's about caring without self-abandonment, maintaining your core while being genuinely open. When you still demonstrate interest, still enjoy connection, still engage authentically with presence and humor, but you don't construct your identity around whether this works out, you create healthy tension in the dynamic. You're connected but not dependent on them for happiness. You're involved but not entangled in their drama. You're present but not possessed by the outcome. Attachment gains power when it's mutual, not lopsided like a seesaw with all the weight on one side. If you accelerate feelings too quickly, pouring everything out in week one, you create imbalance that kills attraction. But when you let them meet you emotionally instead of racing miles ahead into fantasy territory, they begin mirroring your rhythm naturally. And that mirroring creates synchronization between two people. The moment you stop over-validating their every move, they start seeking validation from you. The moment you stop over-explaining your choices and decisions, they start asking questions to understand you better. The moment you stop constantly initiating every conversation, they begin initiating themselves. Because emotional space invites participation from the other side. Empty space begs to be filled. And participation breeds attachment over time. When you overfill the space with your energy, you accidentally eliminate challenge from the equation. And challenge is a subtle but essential component of attraction that most people overlook. Not drama or toxicity. Not games or manipulation. But the quiet understanding that your attention isn't automatic, it's selective. That you choose where your energy goes based on how you're treated. When someone realizes your presence isn't guaranteed regardless of their behavior, emotional stakes naturally rise in their mind. They start paying attention to how they show up. So the real power isn't in becoming distant or cold. It's in becoming disciplined with your emotional energy. It's in mastering impulses that used to control you. It's in pacing investment based on evidence, not hope. And it's staying rooted in your own world instead of abandoning everything the moment someone attractive enters your life. Because when you are anchored in your purpose, when you are not consumed by one person's validation, when you don't rush to secure anything out of fear, the emotional gravity shifts organically without force. And the more you control your own intensity, the more intensity naturally develops on their side. It's like physics. Energy doesn't disappear. It just transfers. When you reach that level where you're no longer sprinting emotionally toward anyone, something subtle but transformative occurs in how you move through dating. Your presence gains weight and intention behind every action. You stop reacting to every behavioral fluctuation like it's a crisis. You stop trying to fix every minor misunderstanding with paragraphs of explanation. And that stillness creates an emotional vacuum in the space between you. When you don't rush to fill it with words, reassurance, or constant contact, they inevitably do. Once you genuinely internalize this truth, something inside you finally exhales for the first time in years. You're no longer manufacturing closeness through forced effort. You're no longer performing to demonstrate worth like you're auditioning for a role. You understand that attraction isn't something you strangle tighter with both hands. It's something you give room to breathe naturally and develop at its own pace. And when you release your grip, the connection either strengthens authentically or reveals itself as weak. Either way, you win. Because you stayed whole throughout the entire process. You stayed centered in your values. You stayed true to yourself instead of morphing into whatever you thought they wanted. And that version of you, unmoved by games, unhurried by social pressure, unshaken by uncertainty, is the most attractive version you possess. Period. There's something people rarely talk about in attraction. The power of emotional consistency over time. Not the fireworks. Not the intensity that burns out in 3 weeks. But the steady flame that doesn't flicker when wind blows. When you're emotionally consistent, you become predictable in the best way possible. Not boring. Not lacking spontaneity. But reliable in your core character. They know you won't explode over small things. Won't disappear when life gets complicated. Won't transform into someone unrecognizable under pressure. That consistency builds trust faster than any words about commitment ever could. Trust gets built through repeated actions, not promises about the future. Most men think they need to be exciting every single day. Constantly entertaining. Always providing some new experience or emotional high to keep interest alive. But what actually keeps interest alive long-term is stability mixed with depth. Someone who remains fundamentally steady while still having layers to discover over months and years. When you stop performing excitement and just exist as a grounded person with genuine interests, hobbies, and goals outside of them, you become infinitely more interesting than the guy doing backflips for attention. Because here's what's magnetic about a man with his own mission. He doesn't need anyone else to give his life meaning. His days matter whether someone's watching or not. His goals exist independent of romantic validation. And when someone realizes they're entering a life already in motion, already built with intention, already filled with purpose, they don't want to be on the sidelines. They want it. But you can't fake this. You can't pretend to have a mission while secretly making them your entire world. They'll sense the performance eventually. The only way this works authentically is if you genuinely build a life you're proud of. Where your time has value because you're investing it in things that matter to you. Where your attention is selective because you have meaningful priorities competing for it. When your life legitimately feels full, you're not desperately trying to fill voids with another person. You're inviting them to add to something already abundant. That's the energy shift everyone feels but can't quite articulate. The difference between someone drowning and grabbing for a life raft versus someone swimming strong and offering a hand. One repels. One attracts. And the difference isn't cruelty or coldness. It's competence and self-possession. When you reach this point, rejection stops feeling like devastation. Feels like information. Someone not choosing you doesn't collapse your world because your world isn't built around being chosen. It's built around choosing yourself first. Investing in yourself consistently. Respecting yourself enough to walk away from situations that don't serve you. That self-respect becomes visible in how you carry yourself daily, in how you speak about your future, in how you refuse to shrink yourself down to make others comfortable with your growth. People sense when someone truly respects themselves versus when they're faking confidence to mask insecurity. The difference shows in hundreds of micro behaviors you can't consciously control. It shows in how you accept compliments without deflecting awkwardly. How you state opinions without apologizing for having them. How you maintain eye contact without it feeling like a power struggle. Self-respect isn't arrogance wearing a mask. It's quiet acknowledgement that your time, energy, and emotional resources have genuine value. That you're not obligated to distribute them freely to anyone who shows mild interest. When you operate from this foundation, you stop tolerating behavior that previously seemed acceptable. The disrespect you once rationalized as them having a bad day becomes unacceptable. The inconsistency you once excused as them being busy becomes a pattern you address or exit. Your standards rise naturally because your self-perception has fundamentally shifted. You're no longer grateful just to be chosen. You're evaluating whether this person deserves access to what you've built internally. This isn't about becoming judgmental or impossible to please. It's about recognizing that compatibility requires mutual effort. That healthy relationships demand two people showing up consistently, not one person carrying dead weight. When you hold this frame genuinely, something interesting happens in conversations. You ask different questions. You listen for different signals. You're not just collecting information to figure out how to win them over. You're actually assessing whether this connection aligns with where your life is heading, whether their values complement yours, whether the energy exchange feels balanced or draining. That evaluation mindset changes your entire presence in dating. You're no longer the applicant hoping to get hired. You're the hiring manager with a specific vision for what you need. And people treat you according to the position you assume. Walk in like an applicant, they'll interview you harshly. Walk in like the selector, they'll present their best qualities. This isn't manipulation. It's accurate self-positioning based on genuine self-worth you've cultivated through disciplined living. The beautiful part is this mindset protects you from investing heavily in wrong situations. When you're evaluating clearly, red flags don't get buried under hope. Incompatibilities don't get ignored because you're afraid of starting over. You see situations accurately because your vision isn't clouded by desperation, by fear of being alone, by the false belief that this might be your only chance at connection. Abundance mentality isn't about having dozens of options waiting in your phone. It's about knowing that your value remains constant regardless of any single outcome. It's trusting that the right connections will recognize what you offer. And wrong connections bouncing off your standards is actually protection, not rejection. You stop chasing people who aren't excited about you because your time feels too valuable for reluctant energy. You stop convincing people of your worth because you've internalized that worth deeply enough to stop seeking external confirmation every day. It lives inside you now, independent of whether anyone validates it today. When someone shows lukewarm interest, half-committed energy, or inconsistent behavior, you don't launch into performance mode trying to reignite their enthusiasm. You simply acknowledge the mismatch and redirect your attention elsewhere. This saves you months, sometimes years, of pouring effort into connections destined to drain you. Time you'll never get back trying to force chemistry that should develop naturally between aligned people. The clarity this brings to your dating life is almost jarring at first. Situations that once would have consumed weeks of your mental energy now get resolved in days. Because you're willing to see reality instead of potential. You're dating who's actually in front of you, not the imaginary version you hope they'll become after 6 months of your patient investment. That shift alone eliminates most dating frustration men experience. The endless confusion about mixed signals. The exhausting cycle of hot and cold behavior. The wondering where you stand. When you require consistency as a baseline standard, people either provide it or disqualify themselves quickly. Either outcome serves you. And here's what happens when you truly embody this. You attract different people entirely. Not just different individuals, but different caliber. Different values. Different maturity levels. Because the energy you project signals what you'll accept. When you project groundedness, discipline, and self-respect, you magnetize people operating at that frequency. The chaotic energy that once felt exciting now registers as exhausting. The drama you once mistook for passion now looks like instability you don't have bandwidth for. Your filters sharpen without you consciously trying. You just naturally gravitate toward people whose actions match their words, whose presence feels additive to your life rather than subtractive. This is the final evolution of feeling less. You're not suppressing emotion. You're no longer leading with unearned intensity. You're letting connection build on the foundation of shared reality, demonstrated character, and mutual investment over time. And the connections that form from this place? They're fundamentally different, stronger, cleaner. Built on actual compatibility instead of projected fantasy. You stop experiencing the whiplash of intense beginnings followed by devastating crashes. Because you're not launching yourself emotionally at people before assessing if they can catch you responsibly. The relationships that survive your standards are the ones actually worth your emotional investment. The ones where effort flows both directions. Where respect exists as a given, not something you're constantly negotiating for. This is what emotional maturity looks like in practice. Not closing your heart. Not becoming cynical or cold. But becoming discerning. Selective. Intentional with who gets access to your inner world. If this resonated, subscribe. Because understanding these principles intellectually means nothing without integration. The next level is applying this consistently until it becomes your default operating system in attraction. That's where real transformation lives.